We shall be having three Bible readings this morning. The first reading is taken from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 31, from verse 27 to 34. Jeremiah 31, 27 to 34. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will sow the house of Israel and the house of Judah with the seed of man and with the seed of beast. And it shall come to pass that, like as I have watched over them to pluck up and to break down and to throw down and to destroy and to afflict, so I will watch over them to build and to plant, saith the Lord. In those days they shall say no more, the fathers have eaten a sour grape, and the children's teeth are set on edge. But everyone shall die for his own iniquity. Every man that eateth the sour grape, his teeth shall be set on edge. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I have made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they break, although I was an husband unto them, saith the Lord. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. For those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts and write it in their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And they shall teach no more every man in his neighbor, and every man his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them unto the greatest of them, saith the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will also remember their sin no more. That's the end of the first reading. The second reading is taken from the book of Genesis, chapter 32, from verse 22 to 31. And he rose up that night and took his two wives and his two women servants and his 11 sons and passed over the ford Jabbok. And he took them and sent them over the brook and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone, and he wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, Let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he said unto him, What is thy name? And he said, Jacob. And he said, Thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, Tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, Wherefore is it that thou doest ask after my name? And he blessed him there. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God's face to face, and my life is preserved. And he passed over Peniel. The sun rose upon him, and he altered upon his thigh. That brings us to the end of the second reading, and we'll go to the last reading, which is the third reading, which is taken from the New Testament, Luke chapter 18, from verse 1 to 8. And he spake a parable unto them to this end, that men ought always to pray and not to faint, saying that there was in a city a judge which feared not God, neither regarded man. And there was a widow in that city, and she came unto him, saying, Avenge me of my adversary. And he would not for a while. But afterwards he said within himself, though I fear not God, nor regard man, yet because this widow troubleth me, I will avenge her, lest by her continual coming she weary me. And the Lord said, Hear what the unjust judge say. And shall not God avenge his own elect, which cry day and night unto him, though he bear long with them? I tell you that he will avenge them speedily. Nevertheless, when the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth? This brings us to the end of the reading. May God bless this reading in Jesus' name.
So today we're going to talk about a topic that I think I had spoken about something similar. So when I was asked to send a theme, I sent the theme a new covenant. And then I realized that it sounds familiar. I had spoken about something similar, but uh, but I couldn't go back and change and say no, no, no. The name of the theme has changed because the Bible passages were pretty much the same thing. So forgive me. We spoke about the covenant a while back, and today we're talking about a new covenant. You would find these issues when somebody like me that is not qualified to be a preacher stands in front of you. So please uh, bear with me. But in studying, I realized that there was quite a difference in both messages. One, as it clearly says, is the covenant that God has with us through Jesus Christ. But when you say a new covenant, it now lets us know that, oh, there is a covenant, and then there is a new covenant again. Then there's the question that comes, and I had to ask myself, does God really make multiple covenants? Because we might say that God is God and he does not change. So, do the covenants of God change? Does that mean that God changes? Not really. I'd like us to look at it from the perspective of a journey. And God makes different covenants with us as we progress in that journey. Our God is almost like a teacher. So when you walk with him, there's a particular point you go through, you get to, and then he makes another covenant with you. It would almost be like two people that just met themselves. And then you make a commitment with yourself and say, I want to spend more time with this person, but just as a friend to get to know them better. Then at some point you commit to being their friend and being there for them. Then you begin to ask yourself questions if this person is really worth your love. And then you make a covenant to maybe take it a step further. You're courting or dating that person. And then you make another covenant, which is you engage the person and you there's a lot of tension. You go down on one knee, hoping that they would also accept to get into that covenant with you. And then they accept. Then you get to another point where, because the last covenant doesn't mean they're ready to get into the next covenant, which is actually you getting the government involved. And and you have to cross fingers and hope that they're going to be there with you, and then marriage becomes a covenant, and on and on and on. So then it makes sense to me that we could get into a covenant with God, but then there's successive covenants that would take place. And the book of Jeremiah, we see God going into a covenant with the children of Israel, and I think Judah, yeah. And he's talking about a new covenant that he's going to have with them. That this covenant is going to put his word in their heart, which is going to be a personal covenant between God and individuals, because they understood that they were in covenant with God as a result of their forefathers' covenant with God. So God had a covenant with their forefathers. Today we're going to talk about Jacob. And so they were operating, the children of Israel were operating entirely under the covenant that God had with their forefathers. And then when they were taken out of the land of Egypt, there was another covenant. But there was no personal covenant connecting them to God. And God establishes that and say this is the new covenant that he's going to make with them. And all of us here are testaments of that covenant that God has made with individuals, whereby his word is inside of you, your body is the temple of God, and within you he speaks to you. There's a direct covenant between God and you. But even though we are in covenant with God, it is very important for us to understand the journey, how God relates with people when he has a covenant with them. And we're going to look at Jacob because it's a very interesting story as we read in Genesis. In Genesis, um, Jacob encountered God. So the question that we would ask ourselves, if God is saying that he is establishing covenants and relationships with us, when you first encountered God, what was it like? It's a rhetorical question, but you can think about it. What was it like when you first encountered God? You see, in the case of Jacob, like many of us, as soon as he encountered God and heard all the wonderful things that God had in store for him, he left with a confident heart, holding on to the promises of God as a holy covenant and assurance of a good life. Jacob was fleeing away from his brother whom he had just betrayed. And remember, the meaning of his name is supplanter. That is to say, you're sitting on that seat, I'll come take it, and then I sit there. You have that, I want it, I'm going to come get it. That was the meaning of Jacob's name. And it was given to him because of how he came. Esau was coming and Jacob was directly holding his heel, as revealed to their mother. So Jacob was coming with that. That was who he was. Now he experiences God when he had taken his brother's birthright by what he knew how to do best, deceit. So he covered himself with the four of animals, and his father thought that was Esau because Esau was the very hairy one, and his father blessed him instead of Esau. Then he ran away. He was fleeing his brother, then God appeared to him. God made a first covenant, which was more like a promise to him, and told him that I'm going to be with you, I'm going to protect you, and all that. So Jacob immediately left there, and he was very happy. That was Genesis 28. Jacob called the place Bethel, which means God's house. Like many of us, the first time that we experience God, the first time that we experience the notion of God, we experience it in his house. So then we become children of God and we're dwelling in God's house. So Jacob experienced what it was like to be in the house of God. And Bethel means God's house. So while he slept, remember, he didn't encounter God directly. He didn't see God and encountered God like he did later on, as we'll come to see. He was sleeping and he found himself somewhere where angels were ascending and descending. And then he heard the voice and the promise. So Jacob found himself in the house of God. He knew that that atmosphere could not be experienced any other place apart from the house of God. And he named that place God's house, Bethel. And then he left. So Jacob goes forth acting like every child that now has an understanding that this house is their father's house. Right? Especially when they have siblings, so there's a lot of competition. Mothers and fathers here would know that siblings are always fighting for one thing or the other, because they understand that 100% whatever is in that house is their father's or their mother's house, and so they have a right to it. And so Jacob moves with that confidence, knowing that God's promises upon his life are sure, and so a good life is guaranteed for him. Jacob goes and competes for his portion of the promise that God has given to him. A confidence that I am a child of God, and so I can achieve anything that I want to achieve. If I wanted a new house, I can achieve it. I can pray to God for a new house. If I wanted a new car, if I wanted a promotion, whatever I wanted, I look up to God because I believe it is my birthright as a child of God. Jacob goes and competes for his portion. He would scheme, suffer, and persist to see those promises made manifest for his benefit. So he lives with the promises with the blessing that his father, earthly father, had given him, and the promises that he had gotten from God's house, Bethel. He would proceed to go to his mother's relative's house, where he would get married to his wife and a second wife, and then have a lot of children. But you would see that his dealing, even in that household, was that of a man that wanted to amass wealth. Jacob wanted to be great. He had been given the words that he was loved by God. He was in God's house, and so it is his inheritance for him to have as much as he could. But he was a hard worker. That was one thing that you couldn't take away from Jacob. Jacob was swift. He was strong. He would work. He would go into agreements. He would go into agreements in a way that he would negotiate, and then you manipulate in one way or the other scientifically for the animals to look the way that they are supposed to look, for him to take more animals than his host. And he did that. And he built a lot of wealth for himself. Now, Jacob was dwelling in the covenant of the house of God. And a lot of us, as children of God, dwell in the covenant of the house of God. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on the revelation of God to you, we sometimes die living our whole lives dwelling in the house of God. And it's a good place to be in. But there comes a time in the life of a believer, when just dwelling in the house of God and enjoying the promises thereof is not enough. The promises of long life, the promises of prosperity, the promises of peace, the promises of health. There comes a time in the life of a believer when just dwelling in the house of your father and enjoying everything there is not enough. It's like a child whose father has everything and you want to remain in your father's house. And your father is not saying you should leave because he has enough. He's not expecting you to go out there and do anything for him. But at some point, you are expected to live a life that is beyond enjoying that which your father has provided for you. Because even your father expects you to have your own dreams and aspirations and to have purpose. And in the context of God, how he looks at us, your dreams and your purpose and aspirations are all provided in his house. The real dreams and aspirations and purpose are outside of God's house, kind of. So, as there comes a time in the believer's life where we have to look beyond just enjoying what is in the house of God, of what use is it if you dwell in your father's house, yet you have not had a personal encounter with him? Now, that is another step. Jacob was dwelling in the house of God, like many of us. Imagine being in your father's house, enjoying everything your father has to provide for you, but you do not have any personal relationship with your father. In Genesis 32, remember the first point in Bethel, Jacob experienced the house of God, and he named the place House of God. In Genesis 32, Jacob encounters God now, his father. There was a difference, and you would see it. When Jacob encountered God, he knew the promises of the father's house were not enough. He left Bethel, basking in the promises of dwelling in the house of God. He met God in Genesis 32 in Peniel. Let's see what happens. He wrestled with God, a representation of God in human persona. Wrestled with God and said, I'm not going to let you go unless you bless me. Why would a man who has amassed so much and has become almost bigger than his host, and so he had to leave and go back, and now he's scared of Esau. He's going to go meet Esau. Now, he sleeps because he's still calculating. He's very troubled. How am I going to go back to my father's house when my brother, I'm sure, is still having this much of hate against me, and he might destroy me, kill me with my family and my children? So he's thinking about this. He has so much wealth. In fact, if you look at the countings, I'm sure none of us have that number of bulls and cows and rams and all that he took just a portion to give to his brother. So he was a wealthy man at that point. But then he wrestled God on that mountain, and he asked the angel, what did he say? I won't let you go unless you bless me. So what happens when you encounter God? In the house of God, there are promises that you enjoy, which all of us as children of God enjoy. And his word does not go and come back void unless it fulfills that which God has sent it to do. So there are promises that we enjoy. But in the presence of God, there are specific blessings. And Jacob understood that. So he told God at that point, he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So when you encounter God, first of all, he was isolated. God is not going to meet you in the middle of a crowd. God actually met Jacob when he had left and he was en route. He had sent his family and he was actually alone. That was where he encountered God. You encounter God in isolation. 2, what happens when you encounter God? You will definitely wrestle with your beliefs, thoughts, and ideologies. In fact, you will wrestle with God. When you encounter God personally, you will wrestle with God. As a believer, you cannot encounter God without wrestling with God. And people would say, would I literally see God in human form in my bedroom? And then he would say, okay, put on your boxing gloves or let's get into the ring and wrestle. No, not that. For Jacob, it was that literal. But for us, there are many things that would happen that would shake you and you would know that you're encountering God. And wrestling with God could be many things. But one very important part of wrestling with God is prayer. And we would see that in Luke when Jesus Christ was giving the parable about the woman. The woman was talking to to a judge that was a corrupt judge. But because of how much he persisted, that could be likened to wrestling with him and his beliefs and her conviction. At the end of the day, he had to give in. So a Christian that does not know how to pray does not know how to wrestle. And if you encounter God and you do not know how to communicate with God in prayer, how are you going to wear God out for him to tell you, what do you want? So you would definitely wrestle with God if you are truly encountering God. Your strong point will be broken when you encounter God. You cannot carry your shoulder like the wisest man, encounter God and still come out believing that you are the wisest man. God would have to break something in you. Even if God has promised you the sun, the moon, and stars bowing down to you, like he did to Joseph. And then his father made him a coat of many colors. When Joseph encountered God in his journey, he had to find himself in prison. So he was no longer this guy that the sun, the moon, the stars were all bowing down to. God breaks you when you encounter him. And so he took Joseph from this place of the promise. Said, you want to encounter me because if you don't encounter me, you're not going to fulfill destiny. You might be the favorite of your father in your father's house, and you would enjoy everything in your father's house. But will you truly live destiny that I have created for you? This destiny of your brothers and everyone bowing down to you. For you to get there, you have to encounter me. And for you to encounter me, I have to break you. Remember, Jacob is this swift guy. Very swift, very strong, very powerful. What did God do? He touched his hip. From that day onward, he worked till he died. He walked with a limp. You're not going to be that fast, Jacob, any longer. You're not going to be that strong, Jacob, any longer. Because where I'm taking you, the place of fulfillment of destiny, I have to cripple that thing that makes you think is the reason why you are achieving all of this. I take it away. So any new feat that you achieve, you know it was given to you by grace and not because you're completely wise or capable. When you encounter God, you either make a choice to hold on to faith or give up in disarray. At that point when God breaks you, there's a choice to be made. When God broke Joseph in that whole story in prison, Joseph could have told himself, or not even in the prison when he was in Potiphar's house and Potiphar's wife approached him. He would have said, I had this promise and here I am as a slave. I'm a slave in Egypt that is such a great place. I can't even run away from this place as a slave. So my entire life I'm going to become a slave. He had a choice to make, to either compromise for a better life as a slave or to remain and make a choice, trusting that whatever promise or covenant that God is about to make with him is going to take him to where God has showed him. So when you encounter God, you will get to that point where you would either break and say God is not worth pursuing, or you hold on like Jacob did. Even when God had broken his hip, he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. When you encounter God, through all of this, your name is changed to fit the destiny that God has in store for you. That is actually something like the final point. Because you have gone through the stages, your name is changed to fit the destiny that is fit for you. Or your name is changed to fit your destiny. Remember the first time he met God and he named the place Bethel, the house of God. God didn't care about his name. Just told him, because I have a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, so I'd always protect their children. So this is the promise of your father's house. You're in God's house, so you would enjoy that promise wherever you go. Your name is Jacob. You're still a supplanter. I know you for that. But there is something that covers you, which is the grace of Abraham and Isaac. So go with it. You're blessed. When he encountered God, God was interested in his name now. And what did God do? God changed his name. He said, because the destiny I'm taking you to, you cannot get there as a supplanter. You cannot get there as that guy that schemes his way around things. You cannot get there as Jacob. Jacob cannot sit on the throne of destiny that I have created for you. The throne I have created for you, only Israel can sit down there. So he changed his name to Israel, one who prevails with God. Because where I'm taking you to, you cannot go there as a supplanter. You cannot go there alone. Because where I'm taking you to, you have to go there as one who does what? Who prevails with me, God. So you have to go there not like a tricky snake. You have to go there like a warrior. But not just a warrior of himself, a warrior that was with God. Now, Jacob was dwelling in a new covenant at that point. And what was that new covenant? It was the covenant made in the presence of God. Because Genesis 28, Jacob called the place, in Genesis 28, he called the place God's house. But in Genesis 32, after God had changed his name, Jacob called the place Peniel. He had seen the face of God. Because it was when he saw the face of God that he knew that there was a new covenant beyond the covenant of just a good life. Because not only did God bless him, God mentions nations. But we will get to see that further. Genesis 35. We didn't read Genesis 35, but this is when Jacob had now met his brother after the place that he had called Peniel, where he saw the face of God. So in Genesis 35, Jacob had gone through this whole journey and found himself back at Bethel, where he started. The first place where he built an altar and called it the house of God. He had gone through Peniel and found himself back at Bethel, that he left when he was a young man with nothing but a staff. Now he had this whole family with sons and daughters. His family was so big that they could clash with the whole city and defeat them. That is how great he had become. And so, in Genesis 35, he got to Bethel. What did he do? He built an altar at Bethel, but he did not leave the name to remain Bethel. What did he call it? El Bethel, which is God of Bethel. You see the difference? At first, it was just the house of God to him. Then he experienced God at Peniel. His name was changed. And he said, here I have seen the face of God. But watch what is happening. God was taking him back to where he started. Because he was not meant to establish a nation by the roadside. God was taking him back to Bethel. The first altar that he set, and it was just the house of God. But this God he had never experienced. So when he got back to Bethel, he reinstituted another altar there. And Bethel became El Bethel, which was what? God of Bethel. Because now he has met the God in whose house he had experienced. The first time he had just experienced the house, not the God. But now that he got back there, he had met the God in whose house he had experienced. He had an experience. He had experienced God in the house of God and was no longer dwelling in the old promise of a good life. He was now dwelling in a new covenant that carried the capacity to birth a nation. Because the moment he named Bethel, El Bethel, God now goes into a new covenant with him. God had changed his name from Jacob to Israel. So God now tells him that from you, I'm going to make a great nation. You remember the covenant that God had made with his grandfather, Abraham. Up until now, he had no relationship to that actual covenant of being the channel through which that great nation was going to come forth. But in experiencing God and encountering God, he was now led into a new type of life. He now understood that walking with God was not just for the earthly benefits which he had gotten. He was, by all definition, a wealthy and powerful man at that point. He was. I think beyond today's standard, because he was allowed to have 2 wives. So he had a lot of children, had many cattle, many sheep, had a lot. But you could see this man getting to a point with God where he realizes that everything that I have that is earthly has nothing to be compared to this covenant that God had been waiting to establish with me. So God is happy you are dwelling in his house and enjoying the promises of goodness and mercy and joy. He's very happy about that. He's also asking if we will dare to ask for more. The true experience of his presence, if we will dare to ask for the true experience of his presence as God, to discover why he called you in the first place. Why are you a Christian? Does it stop at singing hallelujah and celebrating your salvation in Christ? Could there be something beyond just having a good job and being a Christian? Could there be a destiny beyond being a good citizen and enjoying life? In the new covenant, your name will be changed. And you will find new purpose in God. However, you must be ready to lose your hip, like Jacob did. And sometimes that is the part that most of us are never really ready to get to. So we live our lives, Christians. We will definitely make heaven. We want to be the peaceful Christians just in the background. But then there are many areas that God wants to make a new covenant with you in. And you know if you get there that you're going to lose a hip, that you're going to lose a status, that you're going to lose your face, that you're going to lose your time, that wonderful game you love watching at a particular day, you're going to miss it. That there's going to be a complete drift and change in your routine. You're going to become a new person. And the people that you feel know you might forget you because you're no longer that person that they knew and loved. That might be your hip. And because you're not ready to lose that, you never dare to get into a new covenant with God. But what he's telling you is that the promises that he has for you in the new covenant are way bigger than whatever promises that you enjoy just being in his house. Amen.